So good morning, everybody. I'm Smita Garg, Assistant Director, Employer Engagement at the NDSU Career and Advising Center. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's presentation titled, Sometimes You Get to Sell Popcorn, a conversation about life, career, and other things. Who knows what else will come up when we give the mic to two very engaging leaders. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Randy Hudson Buehler, President of the Theodore Roosevelt Medora Foundation, and Dr. Dean Brashani, President of NDSU. Randy has worked at Medora since 1988, perhaps before some of our attendees were even born. When I first approached Randy with an invitation to this presentation, his passion for working with youth and Medora was so evident that even before I could explain and give all the details, he said yes. As you will soon learn, one of his favorite responsibilities is selling popcorn at the Medora musical. Dr. Brashani was named NDSU's 14th president in 2010. His dedication to students and the campus community were evident when he too unequivocally accepted to participate in today's conversation. And I believe he also brought along a cowboy hat. Thank you to the both of you. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. Today's event will begin with a presentation from Randy, followed by, or perhaps interspersed with, a conversation with Dr. Brashani. Towards the end, we will have about 7 to 10 minutes for questions and answers. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box if you're on Zoom, or type them in the comment section if you have joined us via Facebook live stream. Brianna Noopdal, Events Manager, will then pose the questions to our guests. At noon, Pat Breen, Employer Partnerships Manager, will end the session with a few words. With that, Randy, the mic is all yours.
Thank you, Smita, and thank you, Brianna and Pat. It's been fun to get ready for this, and Dr. Brashani, it's an honor to join you. I will say right up front that this is an adventure. I've not done one of these before, so it's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting. I will start with some gratitude to the North Dakota State University. And there's a number of things I wanted to say. First of all, if you're on the screen, you see, that's my office. I love where I get to work. That's my view every day when I walk out the front door, and I do get to walk to work. So it's one of the reasons why I really feel like I've got the best job in North Dakota. With all due respect to you, Dr. Brashani. 3 reasons why I'm very grateful. Last year in the Medora musical, we honored North Dakota things. And whenever we announced the Bison football championship teams, it got the loudest roar of the night in the show. And I am a proud University of North Dakota graduate who cheers wildly for the Bison football. So thank you for giving that to the state of North Dakota. Again, thanks to all of you for putting this together. And really for the opportunity to talk about ways that students can extend their university learning in ways they might not normally think about it, especially in a setting like Medora. If you're following along, I have 3 very selfish motives. And the first one is I love working with young people. I've done it for 32 years. If I hadn't chosen to be in Medora, I probably would have been a teacher. And I feel like we get to do that in Medora. Prior to that, I worked as a CPA for several years, but working with young people is why I'm still in Medora. And there's a very selfish motive. This started out with a very simple request, which NDSU honored in a way that they don't typically. And rightfully so, you are trying to put people into career positions, and that's what you normally advertise. We put out a call for help because we want to operate this summer in Medora. We think people need a place to go and smile and have fun. And the most important person in our team right now is a housekeeper. And I am incredibly grateful that NDSU has posted jobs for summer work that Medora has to offer. And most important one is a housekeeper. But there's a longer term vision. I'm sitting in a building that's 4 years old. It's called the Life Skills Center. And I had a dream that we would actually teach college courses to people who are working in Medora during the summer. And my original vision was that there'd be college instructors that would be here with us in the summer, teaching their students when they're not on their job. But right now I'm kind of thinking, well, there's a new way maybe. Maybe it's done through Zoom. Maybe the instructor can be at home in Fargo. So we'll see where all of this goes, but those are my selfish motives today. And eventually, at some point here, there is a rapid fire conversation that I'd like to share with you about 7 things for 30 years. It's probably since I've been kind of trying to practice these things. But before I get into that, in the very, very short term, in about maybe a week and a half, we're going to be receiving a lot of employees in Medora. And every year I start those orientations the same way with this quote that I found 20 years ago. And I feel it's appropriate, Dr. Brashani, for this event. It goes like this: life is a rush into the unknown. You can duck down and hope nothing hits you, or you can stand tall, grin, show your teeth, and say, dish it up, baby, and don't be stingy with the jalapenos. I kind of feel like that's what this is. I'm not sure how it's going to go. And that's what I tell the kids who work for us in Medora. Just trust me, it's going to be rapid at some point in time, and you're going to go, wow, I didn't see that coming, but it's all good. So, you know, with that, I'll take just a couple more minutes, Dr. Brashani, to give a little background, and then we'll kind of go into a conversation. There is that quote that I always love. So what is the Theodore Roosevelt Medora Foundation? If you look across the state, some people are aware of us. A lot of people are aware of Medora. And the 2 things that would come to people's mind first would be the Medora musical. It is one of the 5 longest running shows in the outdoor theater in the country. We're going to be in our 56th year this summer. Over 4 million people have come and enjoyed an evening in the Burning Hills Amphitheater. In the last 15, 16 years, we've gotten some national attention because a top 100 rated golf course in the country, Bully Pulpit. Those are kind of the glamour spots, but we're really about a 1,000-person organization. There's about 365 employees, 650 volunteers, 36 different business units. We're a nonprofit public foundation supported by over 6,000 people in our history, nearly 1,000 members. And like a lot of organizations, we try to say, what are we really trying to do? And at the end of the day, our vision is we connect people to this place, historic Medora, for positive, life-changing experiences. And if you get to spend a summer here, you can see that happen on a daily basis. Sometimes it's in the smallest ways. It might be very, very impactful. Like this summer, after the winter we've all had, there will be people who will come to the Badlands for spiritual reasons. And there will also be people who will end up spending 3 or 4 hours uninterrupted with their young children. Now, normally that's a big deal. I think this year it'll be different because there's lots of working parents who have been spending lots of time with their kids who might want to break from that, I guess. But, you know, it's an interesting place, and we do some fun things that way. So I love our organization. I wrote this 25 years ago, I'd say. A strong organization delivers truly unique experiences requiring ordinary efforts from ordinary people willing to do more. And that's kind of what today's about. We're all trying to figure out how to do more with less and help each other. And so once again, I want to just say thanks for this opportunity. So getting into the conversation, Dr. Brashani, and just for those who are on the call, know this, Dr. Brashani and I have not rehearsed. We are going to be having a conversation, and he has no idea what I'm going to ask him. So the first rule is you get to interrupt me anytime you'd like, and I get to put you on the spot without notice. The other thing that I think is going to be fair is because I'm working in Medora, and I had an incredible privilege to work with Harold Schaefer, who died in 2001. I worked with him for 13 years. Work is not fair because he volunteered. And Theodore Roosevelt, I'm not a scholar, but I'm a student. At any point in time, I think it's fair to just kind of share one of those stories. So, and obviously the format is a combination of presentation and conversation. So Dr. Brashani, I'm going to share in a moment a story about Harold Schaefer, because he would, you know, a lot of us who have responsibilities, we think about who are some people who you think of as being great leaders that you said, I wanted to pay attention to them. And this is a takeaway that I had from them. So I'll hand the ball to you and kind of respond. And remember, everyone, Dr. Rashani had no time to prepare for that question.
Well, thank you, Randy. And I've been very fortunate, both similar to you. I wouldn't call myself a scholar of Theodore Roosevelt, but certainly a student. I've read quite a few biographies on him and admire him as a leader because in many ways he was opportunistic. He oftentimes found himself in unanticipated situations and became a master of taking advantage of the situation that would advance an agenda and a vision he would have for that given organization in a thoughtful and oftentimes very strategic manner. He advanced very quickly in Washington, D.C. by doing one simple thing. He'd stay during the summer when everybody left. We have to remember that there was no air conditioning at the time, and Washington, D.C. is built on a swamp, and he quickly realized that if he was one of the few people that stayed during the summer, he could push through initiatives faster with less resistance because there was no one there to push back. And I've always admired leaders that are thoughtful and strategic in that manner. The other person that comes to mind as far as an inspiration for me is Robert Gates, who I had the pleasure of working with at Texas A&M. He had just come out of being the director of the CIA. He would go on from Texas A&M to be the Secretary of Defense of the United States. And Bob was a master at learning the culture of an organization. He had never worked at a university and became one of the most successful major university presidents in the United States. He had never worked in the Department of Defense, but he became one of the most historic secretaries of defense of the United States. Bob's simple rule was listen and learn what the culture of the organization is, and then be thoughtful in how to take advantage of using the culture to advance your organization. Those two, I think, come at things somewhat differently, but at the same time, neither of them was born a leader, but they learned to lead very effectively.
Awesome, thank you. Another question before I jump in. When did you know that you were going to be the president of a university?
You know, it's an interesting question because it's something I don't know that I started out as with my aspiration being that. It was simply to be in a leadership role in a major university. And that kind of goes to your next question. As a 20-year-old, I realized I wanted to work in higher education and be a part of transforming people's lives in the same way that my college education had. I didn't really know what that would be. It certainly wasn't be a university president, just simply in some leadership role. But at a point in my career, now 25 some odd years ago, the chair of the faculty senate at Texas A&M said to me, you know, someday, Dean, not today, not tomorrow, but you're going to be a very effective university president. And I have to admit, I was taken back. That was almost an overwhelming concept to me. But as I had a conversation about why he said that, I realized that without that being my intent, I was starting to develop the tools that are necessary to be a good university president, and it reflects the two individuals I just talked about, of watching, learning, listening, and becoming thoughtful about how to apply what I had learned to leading an organization.
Well, there's a couple takeaways from that, Dr. Bashani. One is the power of encouragement. Yes. Somebody saw something in you, and that probably made you think more about it. Those were leading questions to get to Theodore Roosevelt. I shared this with Smita yesterday. I'm going to put this, the rise of Theodore Roosevelt. 32 years ago when I started working here, I read it. It's about 900 pages. I spent almost 3 nights sleepless because I couldn't put it down. Exactly. And at the time, my kids were 5 and 2. And in my copy that I have at my home, in my bookcase, there's a lot of underlining, highlighting, and there's a page that's turned because there's a part in the book where Theodore Roosevelt, who wrote in his diary almost daily, and he had lost his father early in his college career, and he idolized his father, and his uncle was trying to be really helpful to him. But his entry, basically, I'm paraphrasing, says, "Father, I miss you so. Uncle is trying very hard, desperately, to fill your void, but he can't." And that the essence of his message in that diary was, he's a junior, he's a good student, he's at Harvard, and he's writing and lamenting, "I don't have a clue what I'm going to do with my life. I don't know what I'm going to do." And for the students that are on this call, I wrote in the margins 32 years ago when I had a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, don't forget this. Remember this, that people take time to figure out what they're going to be and do, and they might take all kinds of paths before they really settle in. And again, I told you one of my selfish motives is I think Medora can be one of the paths where you help find what you want to do. So thanks for letting me know about how you got to where you were. Harold Schaefer is one of the true privileges in my life, and I'll just share the first memory of him. He had sold his company, created this nonprofit public foundation. I'm hired as a controller, and I did my own audit, spent many nights. There were 64 manila folders. I told my wife, I'm going to stay after hours and read through 2 or 3 folders a night till I get through them all. I got to figure out what this organization is. Harold Schaefer had a habit of coming in to the office, even though he didn't work. He was a volunteer. He'd come in late in the morning. I didn't know that. It's maybe 3 weeks that I'm on the job. And sometimes the folders were so interesting, I might read 5 or 8 folders. And this particular night, it's about 1/4 to midnight. I think I'm in the office by myself. And Harold Schaefer comes around the corner, and I don't know if this is going to work on Zoom, but he goes, "Man, we're cranking it out tonight." And I jumped off the seat of my chair, I think a foot, and I'm a little embarrassed to say this in front of all kinds of people. I thought, man, I think I soiled myself. I was so startled by him. And you know what that man was doing? I think he was 77 years old. This was a brand new nonprofit public organization. He was writing handwritten thank you notes to everyone who had sent in $5 to receive a Theodore Roosevelt lapel pin. That has been burned in my mind forever. He didn't need to be doing that, and he had true gratitude for people who were interested in Medora. It's kind of influenced, I still enjoy writing handwritten notes often to people. My last memory of this guy, and I think anybody who's on this knows somebody like Harold Schaefer or like Robert Gates for you. They're kind of bigger than life in your eyes. In my world, I really only got to know him when he was a grandfather. That's the only Harold Schaefer I know. In my world, knowing him almost 13 years, I never heard him say a negative word about any person, not once. I can't go through a week without acknowledging that I did that. Yet he modeled something for me that was incredible. He had the ability to make you feel like you were the most important person in the room, even if there were 100 people. He seemed to be able to do that with all of them. My last memory with Harold was he was in the hospital, and it was 4 days before he died. And he was in the bed. His wife, Shyla, was there. My wife was there. And Harold's favorite word was wonderful. And he's kind of leaning forward. You could tell he's uncomfortable. He's having a good day because he could sip milk from a straw in the cup. And his wife says, "Are you okay, darling?" And he says, "Wonderful." And then he's grimacing as he's shifting a little bit more. And again, she kind of seems concerned. And then he leans forward. And I don't know, Smita, I'm looking right at you on the screen, okay? And this is what Harold Schaefer did at age 89, a couple weeks before his 90th birthday, 4 days before he passed away. And he got the biggest smile on his face, and he says to his wife, "You're very pretty." He just melted her. And my wife and I were teary-eyed, and we said, "We're going to leave you guys alone." And we left. It was just a privilege to work with somebody like Harold. And I, when you talk about culture, I think that's part of what we try to do in Medora. Nobody does ever going to do it like Harold and Shyla, but I've said to the 300 some employees that join us every year, nobody's going to do it better individually, but collectively, we honor them best if we do it better together, all of us. We all have to have that spirit of hospitality and kindness and care that Harold and Shyla exhibited toward us. So, we'll interrupt ourselves with those kinds of things. I do think I have the best job. This slide, if you're following along, there's an arrow. That's a housekeeper. That's my daughter about 17 years ago. And when I say these interests, I have two children. They're 37 and 32. Both of them, my background is I'm a CPA. They are both CPAs as well. They both work for the world's largest accounting firm, PricewaterhouseCoopers. And both of them would tell you that when they were in the interview process, they called and said, Dad, well, I'm scared, I'm nervous, what do I do? Well, tell them what you've done. I haven't done anything. Yeah, you have, you've worked. They worked since they were 14 years old. Gina was 3 years a housekeeper. The first year she wondered why she needed to be a housekeeper. And then she asked to be a housekeeper for 2 more years. She got a job offer from every major accounting firm. And every interview she called me afterwards and she said, more than half of the time was spent talking about being a housekeeper. They would tell you that that experience was probably one of the most important in gaining the job. The technical knowledge that they learned, all of that was very important. But it's very interesting. And I say that because I really believe their experiences. And Dr. Brashani, I am curious. I worked on the railroad and swung a sledgehammer for 5 summers between graduating from high school and going back to college while I helped my wife to become a nurse. What kind of summer work did you have when you were going through college?
Pretty inglorious. I was raised on the ranch and I worked for my father. But
you were shoveling poop.
Yeah, you got it. And that was back in the day. I had a sister who should have been sharing that work with me, and a father who didn't think that was men's work, not women's work. And so the dirtier the job, the more it was my job. But I was also had a father who didn't have a high school degree, never had the opportunity to go to college, but had a belief, and I think, Randy, I've heard you talk about this, that if you're not smarter, if you're not more gifted, if you're not more educated, just work harder than everybody else and you'll succeed. And that's an ethic that has stuck with me my entire life, and I am not smarter or more educated or better looking or whatever than most people around me, but I can work.
You put the cowboy hat on, though, you get better looking.
That's true. And as long as we're talking about Medora.
That's right. I'm going to shift gears, and this is a question that in your role, I'm sure you've had this, and after you answer it, I'm going to explain why. This question is, can you really briefly, 1 sentence, 2 sentences, tell me your definition of leadership?
You know, I've heard a lot of people try to define it as a personality type or lead, a geographic orientation, lead from in front, lead from behind, and so on and so on. In my mind, the common trait of all leaders, regardless of their personality, regardless of their approach to it, is that they inspire the people around them. Somehow, some way, they find a way to inspire people.
Love it. The reason I asked that question is I had one of the best mentors in Rod Jaden, who was the president. Before he died in 1997, I got to work with him for about 9 years, and obviously I enjoyed being able to be around Harold Schaefer. But when Rod died, the board of directors asked if I wanted to succeed. And I said yes. And I don't think it was an easy decision for them because I was probably too young. But they had the great wisdom to hire somebody to be my mentor, even though I was his boss. His name was Winston Satrin. He had been the executive director of Home on the Range for Boys. He had been the warden at the North Dakota State Penitentiary. And in retirement, he came and worked in tourism. And he would do some things. And one week, he said, we'd have a weekly one-to-one. Even, like, again, he was my mentor. I was his boss. And one day he said, next week, we're going to talk about your definition of leadership. I want you to write it down in one sentence. Man, what a waste of time. But I did it. And the next week we got together and he shared his definition. Leadership is a series of body punches taken every day that over time takes its toll. And I listened to that. A series of body punches every day that over time takes its toll. And I kind of had to say it out loud like 3 times. I said, that sucks. I don't like your definition. And mine was, I had written helping people see the possibilities and then getting out of their way. 20-some years later, I appreciate Winston's definition a lot more than I did the day he told me. But I think it's important. I think there's lots of definitions, but you know that there are days where you're going to take some punches and you still have to kind of fight through. And I think that's the amazing thing. I think our state is so fortunate. It's got great leadership, even during this time. By the way, I have to go back to the very beginning. I forgot my opening, Smita. I was going to give you a weather report. Last night I played golf at Bully Pulpit. It was 64 degrees and 1.5 mile an hour breeze. It's become my practice for the last 6 weeks to start the day to talk about weather rather than COVID-19. Isn't it fun that we've been talking for a half hour without talking about COVID-19? That's the only time we get to mention it. So I'll ask a few more questions, Dr. Brashani, but what started this was a conversation with Smita that I said, I have this little thing when I said yes. That's also a Rooseveltian thing. Roosevelt says, when you're asked to do something, say yes, then go about figuring out how to do it and get it done. So I said, I do have something that I like to share, never in this format, but so there's 7 steps for business and life that I want to share. But because normally this is a presentation and it takes much longer, I thought I'm going to point this out to people. Maybe you didn't know. Theodore Roosevelt was shot at point blank range on October 14th, 1912, while he was making a presidential campaign speech. And this quote that he gave afterwards, I don't always get shot during the middle of a speech, but when I do, I finish the damn speech. He spoke for 84 minutes with a bullet in his chest after getting shot. I'm not going to go 84 minutes. We probably got 10 minutes to go rapid fire through the rest of this. But President Brashani, the first step that I have, I'm going to cue it up with you. You know, you start your day probably in some ways that say give you a chance to have a great start. What's the first thing you do at the start of the day?
First thing I do is make my bed. And
that's funny.
And I mean that very seriously, and that's probably a point you want to speak to.
It is, yeah.
And a fairly famous person has made an entire graduation speech out of it, and you'll probably highlight that.
Yeah, I'm going to. You know, Admiral McCraven did that, and I laughed. I thought, man, when you're an admiral and you can write a book and sell lots and lots of books, it works out really well for you. But I've been giving that talk for 25 years, and my mom taught me. And it really comes from somebody named Susan O'Malley, who used to own an NBA basketball team. And I heard her say that, and I actually have a previous step. I don't know if anybody else can remember being maybe a 4th grader when a teacher would ask you, what's the scariest thing that could happen to you? I remember we had that exercise once. And for me, it was not being able to see. And so the first thing I do every day when I wake up, when I open my eyes, that very first time, literally every single day, I say, thank you, God, for letting me see, and start the day. And then I make the bed. You can't do the second thing right until you do the first. And so if I was speaking to a group of students about this time, I would say, get a paper and pencil out. And if you don't have it, this is going to be fast. And I want to burn this in your head. Make your bed every day. That's step number 1. Step number 2, plan your work and work your plan. I'd say it's been almost 20 years ago now. We had a little project called the Children's Park. There was not one board pre-cut or pre-drilled. 343 people lined up to be volunteers. They were asked one question: are you skilled or unskilled? You were skilled if you could run a circular saw. I had to run a wheelbarrow and a shovel because I can't run a circular saw. But in 4 days, 10,000 man hours were donated. And we have a wonderful little children's park in Medora. We call it the Miracle on Broadway. There were 2 people who organized it. They had a plan on how to use 343 people, 10,000 hours efficiently and effectively. This is a small project, but Dr. Brashani, I mean, what's going on campus right now that would get done if you didn't have a plan and then execute the plan? I mean, what's a big project you're working on right now?
It's hard to build a brand new cutting edge chemistry building without a pretty substantial planning process that then started a year before construction.
So, you know, it doesn't matter to me if it's us individually or students, faculty, or people in the business community. We all know that, but sometimes we forget it. You know, plan your work and then work your plan. Number 3, they're all really important. This one's one of my most valued. I've taught it to my kids since they were 6, 7, 8 years old. Make your expectations known. I really believe people want to help, but it's pretty hard to help if they don't know what you need or what your plans are, what your expectations are. And you know, I'll share one, and I'll ask you, Dr. Brashani. I'll give you one. I'm obviously, I've referred to my kids a couple times. Really proud of them. My son, after being in public accounting in a large firm, after a while said, I really want to live in North Dakota. I really want to live in North Dakota. I think I want to move back. Great. What are you thinking about doing? He said, well, you know a lot of people, Dad. Maybe you could reach out. And I said, you know a lot of people, Jordan. Maybe you could reach out. And he happened to have served in his work as a waiter at the Rough Rider Hotel for a few summers, the CEO of Montana Dakota Utilities at the time. I could have called him, but I don't think I would have been doing him any favors. I said, you know him, call him. And he did. And of course, he had to go through the normal process, and he won the job. And then when it was time to move, he called me and he said, oh, you know, I think it's a good job. He worked for him for 10 years. It was a great company. But there were some moving costs of getting back to North Dakota that he hadn't talked about. And I said, did you do step number 3? He goes, no, I didn't let him know about expectations. I said, well, you haven't come yet. I'd ask. Well, they were a great company. They helped with the moving expenses. That's not to mean that they needed to, but just making your expectations known can make a big difference. So I'll pass the ball to you, President Brashani, just an example.
Well, NDSU is a land-grant institution, and for those that don't know, that means that our purpose is to serve our citizens and to find out what they need and to contribute to their success in meeting those expectations. When Medora first was identified as the future location of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library, I immediately went to our faculty leaders and said, NDSU needs to have a role in this opportunity. Medora isn't just a historical location, it's the base of the Theodore Roosevelt National Park's far too unknown but spectacular natural resources, which resonates with Theodore Roosevelt's interests, which are tied to North Dakota in fairly extraordinary ways. And Medora is a place where people can literally put their hands on the history of the United States. And that's unusual in the sense if you can go to the places that presidents in the past spent their time, but you don't get a feeling for them being there. Whereas Medora is a place where you get that feeling, and it fits hand in glove with what the mission of NDSU is. And I said, how can we be involved with the future of the Theodore Roosevelt National Library? And they held a number of working sessions talking through that and came up with a wide range of research opportunities through engagement opportunities, through ways we could support the library and the town of Medora as it matures over the next decade. And it really was extraordinary when people put their heads together to find a way for NDSU to have a role and a presence in a location that is 5.5 hours away from Fargo, North Dakota. And in some very exciting ways that are maturing through relationships we've built with the foundation, relationships we have built through the Park Service and the park superintendent, relationships we have built with people that have a stake in Medora, which include former U.S. cabinet members, congressmen, state and civic leaders, and they came up with a range of opportunities for NDSU to have a role in it, and that's why I was so excited about the opportunity for perhaps some of our students to have a role in it. It's rare that we have a chance in our lives to participate in creating something that has more impact than I see it, the future of the library and Medora in North Dakota.
That's thank you. I mean, I didn't know where you were going to go with that. It also helps me understand how and why even this conversation was so quickly made available. Obviously, you made expectations known months ago about building a connection to Medora that I was unaware of.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to say thank you again in a new way of understanding. That's a great. So step number 4, if it's not right, fix it. And I'll share one, and if give you a moment to think about one, Dr. Brashani, but and this may have a new way in the future, but in Medora, our engine is the Medora musical. That's what drives everything. And if the room is not clean, the Medora musical isn't enjoyed as much as it should be. So that's why I say the housekeeping job is the most important job. Not just as a fun thing to say, it literally is. And all of those things matter as we get up to the evening that is our climax of a day, having 2,800 people in a theater, having a spectacular evening. Well, sometimes Mother Nature messes with you, and that can change the outcome of a night. And the first 10 years, 15 years probably working in Medora, the worst experience you could have was a show that went an hour and 10 minutes, technically a show, according to policy, which I don't like that word. And I would end up getting on my bike and riding over to the front desk because there would be young guys and gals getting just really beat up by customers who were upset because they didn't get to see the show they wanted to see. And we were hiding behind a policy. And literally employees, I would sometimes have to say, come, I'll take care of them, because they'd be in tears. And one night, it's about midnight, we're taking care of all those people, and a coworker of mine, Cordell Dick, asked what I call the magic question. He said, how can we make a rainout a happy event? I said, that's amazing, Cordell. That's brilliant. He goes, what? Well, in the spring of the year, often we will have a promotion. Buy one ticket, get one free. Buy one free, a BOGO. I said, let's just decide right now that every rainout is a BOGO event. We'll give people the choice of having a refund or 2 tickets for the one that they purchased, and they can come back this year or next year. I have not had an employee cry after a rainout. Most of the time, I've even joked that the people in Dickinson watch the weather, and if they think it's going to rain, they order tickets that day. But I think we had something that was broke, and we needed to fix it. And, there's all kinds of examples, but sometimes, Dr. Brashani, those situations can turn into the best for you. Have you got anything that comes to mind?
Well, at the risk of sounding dismissive of the people that had the vision for the library being in Medora, those aren't people who are necessarily scholars. They're not people who necessarily have extensive experience working with natural resources. I could go on and on with the opportunities that Medora and the library represent. And going back to that group that I brought together, that's where I asked them to look at what potentially isn't going to happen with the library and Medora that we could make happen or help make happen? What are the skill sets we can bring to the table? What is the assistance and support we can provide to maximize the opportunity in Medora, both again from a natural resources perspective, but also a historical perspective. And I think that's what's gotten people the most excited, is they have found mechanisms and avenues that they're going to be able to participate in the future of something that will get national attention in our state, that maybe would have happened, but maybe wouldn't have happened without their involvement.
Yep, good example. This next one I'll share is my favorite. It should be modified, but I'm claiming to my original when I put this together many, many years ago. Work harder than everybody else. I do modify it to say, and smarter. It isn't just about brawn. We work harder and smarter. But one time I was in an interview situation, and the interviewer assumed that the person who had the greatest influence in my working life was Harold Schaefer. And I said, that's a really good assumption, as much as anybody. But I would say my dad, who did not have an 8th grade education, never made $9 an hour in his life, had the greatest influence. He got up every morning between 1:30 and 2:30 and went to the creamery and stacked dairy cases for 13 hours. He had Popeye arms. He's 91. He still has them. But somehow he managed to buy a snow blower. And I remember it was 1976, and we had one of those 3 or 4 day blizzards in North Dakota. And I asked my dad if I could use the snowblower to go and try and make some money. I think I was 15 or 16 years old. And he said, yep, you can, but you got to buy the gas. You got to do a good job. Okay. I get the tank fueled up, and I started moving out. And my dad comes out. He goes, where are you going? So I'm going to go blow the neighbor's driveway. He said, nope, you're not ready. What do you mean I'm not ready? I've got the snowblower. They said I can come do their yard. And he said, no, and you're not going to charge them anything. He was not a business person. He said, you're going to take whatever they give you. I don't agree with that yet, but that was his rule. But the other rule that he gave me was the most important lesson in work. He said, you don't have all your tools. I didn't know what he was getting at. I said, you go back and get a shovel and a broom. He said, you clean their sidewalk so well that they want it to snow again just so they can watch you. And it had turned into an almost 4-day blizzard. I did the same people's driveways and sidewalks 4 and sometimes 5 times. Some people on the block gave me cookies and milk, and other people paid me handsomely, and I made $850 in 1976 over a 3-day period. And I never left until it looked like it was summertime on their sidewalk and their driveway, because he told me, I'll never forget it. You clean it so well that they want it to snow so they can watch you do it again. That's really been with me before I met Harold Schaefer. Work harder than everybody else. Step number 6, do the right thing. Got an example for me, Dr. Brashani?
I do, and there's so many that come to mind, but we live in a world where it's easy to take shortcuts. And I'm going to go back to something that resonates with me, and I'm sure a lot of the people on the phone. When Craig Bohl was brought to be the transition head coach as our football program moved to Division I, he had come from Nebraska that had had monstrous, huge national success. But he came to NDSU because he wanted to develop a winning program in a very different way. Nebraska had a reputation of winning, but winning at any cost. And oftentimes they were recruiting student athletes who were athletes, but not at all students, and they weren't even particularly good people. And he wanted to approach a program in a very different way. And he realized that to develop a consistent winning program was going to take a ground up approach that wasn't going to happen overnight. And it did take him fighting through a number of tough years. But as he matured the program and as he brought in the type of student athlete to bought into a culture of discipline and success in learning and success and step-by-step improvement, what he laid the groundwork for has obviously become, literally has made NCAA history as the winningest football program in Division I history in the United States. He didn't get there overnight, and it took several coaches following him to take up his work, but he did it the right way. And I can't even remember the last time one of our football players got in trouble with the law, did something inappropriate, because the culture of the program is self-correcting. The team members themselves enforce good behavior. They enforce good success in the classroom. They enforce good behavior off of the field, and they enforce the expectation of being successful in the competitive environment. And that is my definition to this day of doing it the right way, building slowly, steadily, setting expectations, and achieving your ultimate goals.
I love that. Thank you for sharing, because that's a foundational story that goes across almost any organization, discipline. Mine is just kind of silly, fun. But if any of you have ever been to the Burning Hills Amphitheater in an evening at the Medora musical, there's 2,853 seats in that theater. Every one of them has a name in the theater. And there's one that is my favorite. It was 1993, I believe. We were still raising money for the theater. And a lady had come into my office. She had been at the show the night before. It was a sold out night, hot August night. The story I'll tell you is actually in the Fargo Forum. She came in, she had lost a bracelet, she said. And I said, she had been camping. Well, did you check the van? Yep, your people took the seats out of the van. They looked everywhere. Couldn't find it. I asked her where she sat at the amphitheater, and she wanted to come up with me. I said, no, you were going for breakfast. Go down to the hotel for breakfast. I have to back up and tell you that I'm prone to lose things. I already told you about my dad. When I was about 11 years old, we were camping at Fort Abraham Lincoln in the fall of the year, and somehow I had a $20 bill that I probably don't know why or how I had it, but I lost it. And I was introduced to St. Anthony, that you should pray to him when you lose things. St. Anthony, come around, something is lost. It needs to be found. To this day, my dad swears he did not plant the $20 bill, but I found it amongst millions of leaves. So St. Anthony and I have become really good friends, because I do lose a lot of things and I find them. Well, that morning, it was a very, very warm August morning, probably 90 degrees already by 10:30 in the morning. And when I in the theater, we looked, couldn't find anything. And I'm ready to give up, and I'm in the upper level, and there's all the popcorn had been pushed to the end of the aisle, and I said the prayer. St. Anthony, come around, something is lost. It needs to be found. And I took a step, and I kicked accidentally that mound of popcorn. And there it was. It was a $15,000 diamond bracelet. So I went downtown. I found the lady at the hotel. I got the best hug I've ever been given in my life. And she wanted to give me a $500 reward. I can't do that. I can't do that. And of course I didn't. The right thing was to return it, right? And it stuck with me forever, because unknown to me then, she had just moved from Phoenix, Arizona to North Dakota to move to Fargo. And she wrote a letter to the editor saying what had happened. This would never have happened in Arizona. And she's so glad to come to our state of North Dakota. And unknown, she had called my assistant in Medora and asked if I had any family members. And she was told that I had 2 young children. So there's one seat up at the amphitheater that instead of a $500 personal gift, she made a $1,000 donation and named a seat in my kid's name. And I still get emotional about that, because I wouldn't remember what I spent $500 on in 1993. But the gift of the seat is forever for me. And in just doing the right thing often has a reward that lasts much, much longer than just the moment. The last step is you got to have some fun. Sometimes you got to sell popcorn. And my wife doesn't like that I still employ these 2 rules at work. I still sell popcorn, sometimes as many, last year maybe 20 nights out of the season. Just a couple of years ago, it was as many as 60 nights. And the reason I do it is I love it. It's fun. And I always have a bet with the kids who work for us. If they want to take the bet, if they can sell more popcorn than I do, I'll be buying pizza and a soda after the show, or pizza and a beer if they're over 21 and that's what they prefer. But if they take the bet and I sell more, they wash my car the next day. So it's so it's a little bit of fun. I haven't done this in years because I am getting up where rupturing an Achilles tendon makes it harder. I enjoy the game of basketball, and everybody thinks someone else's job is better than theirs. Everybody does. And on a given day, that's true. Sometimes you'd rather be mowing lawn than serving dinners in a restaurant. Sometimes you'd rather be housekeeping. So I always said, okay, if you don't like what you're doing and you think you can beat me in one-on-one basketball, let's play. You get one day to go to any job you want, and then it's the manager's choice to see if you get to stay there. That one's getting harder because I'm getting older and they're getting to be a lot better basketball players. I really want to say thanks.
I want to jump in here because I don't know anything about the training of your staff there, but I know that they have fun. And I learned that a few years ago when I was checking in, and the young woman at the desk very excitedly said, I've been waiting for you. I've been waiting for you. I'm an NDSU student. I said, we got talking, and I said, where are you from? And she said, Bozeman, Montana. I said, let me get this right. You left Bozeman, Montana to come to school at NDSU, and you're working Medora instead of going back to Bozeman in the summer? And she said, yeah. And I said, why would you give up all the beautiful, the scenic reasons that people live and breathe for Montana? And she said, I wanted to meet fun, exciting people. And I'm meeting an incredible breadth of people. And some of the funnest ones are the families. I said, really? She said, well, first off, the kids are so excited to be there. But second of all, we get to meet the parents. And you'd be amazed how often the parents have really interesting stories. I am so excited about this because of the people I've gotten to meet. Yeah. And it occurred to me that your staff aren't only encouraged to have fun, but they're encouraged to get to know the people that are visiting Medora. And we still laugh about how excited she was that the president of her university had walked through the door that day.
You're giving me chills. I love hearing that. We're not perfect. We make mistakes, but by and large, I'm really grateful and proud of the folks who work here. So we're going to leave about 5 or 6 minutes for questions, and I'm just going to close with these thoughts. There's a children's book, The Important Book. And, part of the book, I think there's a poem in there. I can't say it exactly. The important thing about rain is it's wet. It falls from the sky. It's shiny. And it has about 5 other characteristics. But the last line is, the important thing is it's wet. Well, my closing thoughts are, the important thing is I need to hire people, and I really need housekeepers who want to come and have a great time in Medora. They get paid more than about $4.50 more than any other job. They have daytime jobs, so they get overtime working at the musical at night. And so I want to remind everybody that I have a selfish interest. The important thing is I need housekeepers. And again, also just to say, Smita, Brianna, Pat, Dr. Bershani, can't say thank you enough. And I did say I love sharing Harold Schaefer's stories. This will be the very abbreviated version. If you're looking on the screen, I heard Harold say something one time. It deserves a 4-minute setup, but I will not use that. The reason the letters U and I are in red, he spoke to a group of kids and they asked him, what he wanted to leave with them. And he said, he had them turn around, the word business challenge was on a banner, and he said, he told me afterwards that it just spontaneously come to him. He said, take a look at the word business. If you look at the word closely, if you take the letters U and I out of the word, mostly what you are left with is a bunch of BS. Along the way, he taught me, and he was teaching those kids that if you cared more about the you in the transaction than the I or the me in the transaction, somehow everything worked out better. So with that, I'll close and say if there's questions. I hope we have a few minutes. I'm sorry, we maybe went a couple minutes too long.
No, I think that was a wonderful message that you shared with us. We do have a couple questions, and I know that we only have a few minutes left, but I think there's one that would be a really good one, even if it's the one that we close on. And the question is, what message would either of you have for our graduating seniors that are entering or are trying to enter the job market during these unprecedented times? Do you guys have a message of hope or some advice for these students during these times?
I think I'd say don't make your perfect job be your measure of your first job. This is going to be a tough time to find jobs. It's going to be a tough time to find good jobs. It's going to be a tough time to find great jobs. Don't get obsessed with finding your perfect job right off the bat. But whatever you do, have it be something that's going to prepare you for that perfect job as soon as it becomes available.
That's very similar, Dr. Brashani, to my thought. And this is not for Medora's benefit. It's a parallel thought that I struggle sometimes. I try to be an optimist all the time, but I'm not always. I think that there's just as much future and hope for someone graduating today. It's a very momentary point in the history. There have been all kinds of times. And I think the brightest students are the ones who are going to approach everything with gratitude and see opportunity. I really think this new environment that you're going to be working in, you're going to come up, just like Dr. Brashani challenged the staff to look for opportunities for a presidential library. If I was a young student, I'd be going, how's the world changing? And what new businesses are there going to be? And what do I need to learn about those things? And I'm telling you, it doesn't matter what job you are in, you are going to learn some things that will be very valuable if that's how you approach the job. So, you know, I would say just be encouraged. Don't focus on that this is a difficult time. Focus on what the opportunity is.
Thank you both. I think that was some great advice. I can relate to that, being only a few years out of college. And my first job out of college was in the construction industry, which I never would have ever imagined I would end up there. And luckily I've moved on to NDSU and into the position that I really love here. I think we have time for one more question. There was one that came in for President Brashani. We've heard a bit about the significance of the housekeeping position and what it can lead to. What job have you had that you felt at the time was not contributing to your future career, but ended up surprising you?
I was an orientation peer group leader between my junior and senior year in college. And to tell you the truth, it was a way to not go home and work for my father was my main motivation. And that is where I realized I wanted to work in higher education the rest of my life. And I have never done anything but work in higher education the rest of my life since then, because I was able to calm and advise 25 young freshmen who were scared to death about going to college and convince them that they could be successful. And the power of doing that for those young people changed my entire perspective of what I want to do with my life.
Thank you for sharing. Do we have time for one more quick one? Randy, there was one that came in that says, what act of creativity or innovation from a student worker or an intern has surprised you the most?
Oh, man, I should have written a book about them. I'll give you a quick one. We trademarked this. I had a communications intern about 20 years ago, maybe 15. Shanna Chrisman was her name. And we were sitting around the lunch table, and she says to one of her colleagues, "Oh, you're so Medorable." I said, "What?" She said, "Medorable." I go, "Shanna, we got to own that word. We got up after lunch. I connected her up with an attorney. We got the copyright and the trademarks to that word. She designed T-shirts with a down and a right arrow that said, I'm downright Medorable. She had one with an arrow pointing to the person beside her, I'm with Medorable. Someday I think we should open a Medorable store, but that's just creativity. It just spontaneously happened. And I literally, I think I could give you 20, but that's the first one that comes to mind.
Thank you for sharing. Pat, do you want to help wrap things up for the event today?
Absolutely. I want to give a big thank you to Randy and Dr. Brashani for this truly thought-provoking and timely presentation. We are recording this. I will be going back and re-recording it when sometimes I'm feeling a little bit down because of what's happening in our world right now. So it's definitely a pick-me-upper. So thank you so much for taking the time to give us your words of wisdom. I also like to thank all the students and employers and faculty and staff that have joined in on this event. We had an outstanding group of people here. Seeing the list of everybody, it's just very inspiring. So thank you all. I'd like to encourage any students to go out into CareerLink and check out the job positions that Randy's been talking about. I just want to share, when I was growing up, I spent most of my summers hoeing sugar beets, hoeing the weeds out of sugar beets. Getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, going out into a field where the leaves were about 3 feet tall, and it was all dewy and wet, and you're walking through there, and then by afternoon, you're done with the hypothermia and you got heat stroke because it's so hot out. But it did teach me that, persistence and hard work will pay off. It was my first job, and I learned a lot of what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do. So thank you so much, Randy and President Brashani, for your presentation today.
Thank you. It was fun.
Thank you all.